Okay, these are the practice problems from the notes. So again, starting to think about strategies for solving problems. So even though we talked about this in class that, hair would be an example of incomplete dominance, one of the things that you want to pick up on is when you see three different phenotypes. So you've got straight hair, wavy hair, and curly hair, right? Regardless of the trait, when you see three different phenotypes, that's indicative of incomplete dominance, right? Remember, when it's complete dominance, you have an either or, right? Tall plant, short plant, round seeds, wrinkled seeds. And so, again, these are little things that you want to think about. A lot of solving problems is sort of your meta analysis, right? You got to think about your thinking and you got to ask yourself the right kinds of questions. Okay? So really, other than that, this just boils down to a regular question in which you can set up a Punnett square. A person with straight hair marries someone with wavy hair. Can they have a child with curly hair? So for me, I'm going to assign H as my straight hair. I'm going to assign little h as my curly hair, right? And so remember, those are the two extremes, straight or curly, and wavy somewhere in the middle. So that means that the heterozygous form has to be wavy, right? So if a person with straight hair, then that has to be big H, and the person with marries someone with wavy hair has to be then heterozygous. Can they have a child with curly hair? So I've got parents, genotypes HH crossed with heterozygous big H, little h. Then I want to look at what are the possible gametes. So the gametes that this parent can produce are only big H. The gametes that this parent can produce are big H or little h. So I'm going to set up a Punnett square in which I have two squares going across the top and one square going down the side. Doesn't matter which parent is which, but one parent, the heterozygous, has two possible gametes. The other parent has only one possible gamete. And so that gives us big H, big H, big H, little h. And so in order to have curly hair, you require two little h's. And so therefore, there is 0% chance of a child with curly hair. All right. Now, hair is an interesting thing, and I mean, these are simplified problems and stuff. We talked about color the other day. There's lots of things that influence hair, color of hair. I think there's a lot of environmental factors, hormones, lots of stuff going on. Interesting things there. But for this simplified question, that's how it looks. All right, next problem. So, child with type O blood. Whoops. So, type O blood is born to a mother with type A blood. What is the genotype of the child, the mother? What are the possible genotypes of the father? So, let's start off with what we know. All right. The child is type O. So, as far as type O goes, for the phenotype type O, there is only one possible genotype. The child has to be homozygous recessive. The mother is type A. Now, she could be IA, homozygous dominant, or she could be heterozygous. The reality of it is there's only one option here for mom, since the child is homozygous recessive. The child has to inherit at least one recessive allele from mom. So therefore, that tells us that mom is heterozygous for type A. Now, as far as the father goes, again, the father has to contribute one recessive allele to the child with type A. So father has to be any kind of version involving father must have a genotype including a recessive allele. And so therefore the father could be any combination of type A heterozygous, type B heterozygous, or the father himself could be type O. So any one of those are possible. What's important in this kind of question is there's no need for a Punnett square, but you would have to offer explanations as to how you're picking the genotypes. So for child type O, you'd have to explain that type O requires two recessive alleles, right? Requires two recessive alleles. And then again, as I said, you'd have to explain in words that mom has, if she's type A, she has to have the A allele, but to have a child that's type O, she must also possess a recessive allele. So you'd have to indicate that. All right. Okay, final problem. So we've got babies and parents, and we're trying to figure out which baby belongs to which parents. So we're going to start by putting in all the possible genotypes that we can figure out. So we've got baby one, right? And baby one is type O, so that has to be recessive. Baby two is type B, so that has to be either they are dominant or they are heterozygous for B. Now, Mrs. Doe and Mr. Doe are type A. So to be type A, you either have to be homozygous dominant or you could be heterozygous for type A. Now, if we look at this right off the bat, there is no way that Mr. And Mrs. Doe could produce a child with type B. So at this point, you're essentially done, and you could answer the question based on that, and that is simply um, there is no possible B allele to produce baby number two from Mr. and Mrs. Doe, right? Neither contain a B allele to have baby number two, and you're done. All right. Now, if you would have tackled it from the other, now they could very easily produce baby number one if both parents are heterozygous for type A, because each parent could contribute the recessive allele for baby one, type O. Now, if you tackled it from Mrs. Jones type A and Mr. Jones type AB, well, Mr. Jones would have to be IAIB, and Mrs. Jones being type A would either be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. And if you tackled it from this, you're in the same scenario that in this case, neither of those parents could produce baby number one because the father, who is AB, does not possess a recessive allele. And so therefore the child would not be able to inherit two recessive alleles, and so they couldn't be the parents of baby one. Okay, so you don't always need Punnett squares to solve problems, but you can see the only way to work through this is identifying genotypes and then making sure that you are able to logically explain, right? You can't just throw out phenotypes and then just say, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Doe, baby one belongs to Mr. and Mrs. Doe without being able to justify your answer. Okay, hope that helped.